Welcome to Flames of Freedom, Episode 8, Winds of Change, a docudrama based on actual historical events, brought to you by Lance Toland Entertainment. In the previous episode, we learned from Zipporah that Samuel's son Moses had been arrested for an unpaid gambling debt, and that James Oglethorpe, in his youth, had been involved in a barroom brawl after being accused of being a follower of James, the would-be king in exile in France. He killed his accuser and was facing a lifetime behind bars himself for murder.
One night, Mr. Oglethorpe and several of his young companions had been drinking at a pub near the Docklands. Another party of young men sitting at a nearby table had become quite rowdy. One recognized Oglethorpe.
Look who we have here! Royalty, I say. James Oglethorpe.
Who's he?
Who's he? If he's his mother's son, he's a bloody Jacobite. Or have you renounced that bitch who's been licking King James's ass and the cock of all the other bloody members of the Stuart clan in France?
Mr. Oglethorpe stood and walked casually to his accuser's table.
Sir, I don't believe we have ever met. Your name, sir?
Geoffrey Collinwald. What's it to you?
I always want to know the name of the man whom I write about in my journal.
Not only is he a worthless Jacobite, he writes in his diary like my sister. And what might you say about me, Mr. Oglethorpe?
I have a special section for definitions of two-faced assholes that belong on a dung heap. I want to be certain I have your name correctly spelled when I inscribe it below the rest of the worthless snot whose names populate my shit list.
Collinwald and the rest of his mates jumped to their feet and drew their swords. Oglethorpe did the same. This man's drunken state was no match for a sober, skilled swordsman. And Oglethorpe quickly disarmed three of them, inflicting minor wounds. Collinwald rushed at him, but Oglethorpe sidestepped, parried the man's attempts to stab him, and then sliced him first across the neck before burying his sword between the man's ribs. Collinwald collapsed to the ground and took his last breath. One of his friends rushed to his side.
Jesus, you killed him, you son of a bitch!
You take another step in my direction, and your fate will be the same. You men started the fight. I finished it.
We'll see to that. When I'm done with you, you'll be hanging from the gallows!
Did Oglethorpe go to jail?
For nearly 5 months.
But it was in self-defense.
Yes, but not everyone saw it that way. Lucky for Mr. Oglethorpe, the courts finally agreed with you and exonerated him of all charges, saying he indeed did act in self-defense.
I like him. He seems to be fearless.
Yes, that was his reputation. He was also, how do we say it, very impetuous.
What do you mean?
For example, my father once told me there were rumors that he threw a glass of wine into the face of a prince, and he was just 15 years old, barely older than you.
How in the world did he get away with that and live to see another day?
As best I can recollect, Oglethorpe was serving Prince Eugene of Savoy and had joined him and the Prince of Württemberg for a glass of wine. Playfully, the Prince of Württemberg dipped his fingers in his goblet and flicked some wine into Oglethorpe's face, laughing the whole time. Oglethorpe didn't find it particularly funny, even if the prince was royalty.
That's a good joke. But I believe we do it much better in England.
Really? As far as I can see, the only thing you do better in England is bangers and mash.
Oglethorpe filled his cup to the brim, then flung the entire contents into the prince's face.
Now that's how we do it in England.
My prince, I think this young lad has shown you up, eh?
With great sobriety, the German prince wiped his face with his sleeve and stared at Oglethorpe. Tension filled the room. Yes, our Mr. Oglethorpe had, what do the Ashkenazi Jews call it? Is it not chutzpah? He was someone who rarely backed down, and it served him well when he was elected to parliament. Did you know that he became an advocate for the Jews at a time when that was not very popular in England?
How was that?
According to my father, it goes back to his days at Oxford, where he read an interesting book by a philosopher who challenged the English to reconsider their centuries-old hatred of us Jews.
Frankly, I have never actually met a Jew before, but I have it on good authority that you can't trust them.
So you would condemn them as a people on hearsay alone?
Everyone knows what these people are like. Besides, they killed Christ.
You're telling me that Mr. Solomon, the tailor who made these clothes, travelled back nearly 2,000 years to kill Jesus?
Don't be ridiculous.
It's you who is being ridiculous, my friend. If you read John Toland's work on reasons for naturalizing the Jews, you'd realize that you're a prime example of the typical English bigot. You think of yourself as a rational intellectual, but you're blind to your own misbegotten beliefs. In my experience, Jews are hard-working and contribute to the life of this great country. Why should we shun them?
Oglethorpe, why is it you are always standing up for minorities and the downtrodden? These people want to destroy what is best in England. They're vermin. Cromwell made a grievous mistake by allowing them back into this country.
That, my friend, is where we part ways. What use is this fine educational institution if it produces people like you with no capacity for independent thinking?
You insult me, sir.
Rather, it is this place that insults my intelligence. I'd rather spend my time with Jews and the working class than waste my days in frivolous debates with those who know nothing of the world.
Mr. Oglethorpe! Mr. Oglethorpe, come back!
Good day, sir. I think I shall pursue my education elsewhere, in more suitable environs.
So he never went back to Oxford?
No.
Maybe I could follow in his footsteps and skip going to university.
That is not the lesson I want to convey, young man. Your education is everything. Do you understand me? If you tell your parents I gave you that notion, I'll disavow every word.
I was just kidding, Nona.
Young man, there is a little of the devil in you, but I like your spirit.
So, what else can you tell me about Mr. Oglethorpe?
I learned from my father that there were winds of change happening all over England in those years. The papers were filled with stories about James Oglethorpe, who had become a Tory and was challenging the status quo on time-worn traditions. Little did we know how our destiny will soon be intimately tied to his when he rebutted a man named George Bailey one fall day in 1729.
In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, would we soften our stance on crime, our streets shall be overrun by riffraff, and it shall not be safe to walk out of this chamber or our dwellings day or night. Hence, I oppose any changes to the rules and laws by which we all live. And why should the poor not live by them as well? If they break the law, they should pay the price for their deeds. If they can't afford to reimburse their jailers for food and lodging and suffer as a consequence, who is at fault? They hath none to blame, yet themselves. Sir, thy time has elapsed.
I am not yet finished speaking.
Sir, thou hast used all thy time. Now please, stand
Give
down.
him more time.
More time! More time! Order! Settle down, or I shall bid the sergeant-at-arms to eject thou from this hall. Order! Mr. Speaker, more time! Mr. Bailey's time hath elapsed. I recognize Mr. Oglethorpe. Thou hast 10 minutes, sir.
My father told me that as Oglethorpe approached the lectern, passing Bailey along the way, Bailey greeted him with an icy stare.
May thou with thy liberal ideas sear in hell, sir.
Mr. Bailey, not before you are consumed in the devil's fire as well. Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me the floor. And, Mr. Bailey, might I say, your arguments are filled with misconceptions, untruths, and vile prejudice.
No! I will not have my good name impugned by this fool of a man. Order, Mr. Bailey, this is my last warning, sir. Sit, or I will have you ejected.
As I was saying, if we are to fix this social ill, a harsh penal code with no compassion for the plight of the poor is no solution. My committee concluded our visit to the Marshalsea prison in Southwark only a fortnight ago, where some are jailed for no more than a shilling, despite a recent Act of Parliament. It is a travesty. People imprisoned for nothing other than petty debt are being starved to death. Just 8 months ago, my good friend Robert Castell was tragically imprisoned for a debt of £5, but had no means in his pocket to bribe the jailer. What was his punishment for having landed on hard times? Being placed in a cell designed for 4 men, yet crammed with 40, suffering from smallpox. They may as well have hung him on the gallows, for it were a death sentence. Not for murder, not for theft. He died of smallpox in a cesspool because of a minor debt.
Mr. Oglethorpe pointed at Bailey, who looked away in shame.
Mr. Bailey, is this the justice you're advocating? We hast created a penal system that is hell on earth. Some of thou in the opposition might protest that thou knowest many gracious souls who grant hard-earned money to support the poor prisoners who cannot fend for themselves. Yet where doth that money go? For assistance, for which it is intended? No, it lines the pockets of the warden.
Careful, Mr. Oglethorpe. Thou be prosecuted for slander with such reckless accusations.
I shall gladly defend my worthy name in the court, sir, for I have ironclad proof and first-hand testimony. Some of thou know many of our Jewish brethren who have been fortunate to escape from Portugal and Spain, evading the evils of the Inquisition. Yet I shall let thou in on a secret. In addition to Portugal's brave wines and quaint olives, we are importing their instruments of human suffering and torture. Shears, thumbscrews, iron collars, and iron caps to be used at the whim of jailers. Even worse, when prisoners canst not or are unwilling to pay bribes, they are locked up with putrefying bodies as rats devour the faces of the corpses. Or the jailers use thumbscrews and skullcaps on the inmates to exact more money from the indigent. And we bid ourselves civilized? This is not Spain or Portugal. This is our England. And we collude with the jailers who repurpose heinous tools and practices to extract confessions for what? Being indigent and dispossessed? Gentlemen, poverty is not a crime. It is a circumstance that can be remedied if only we lend our brothers a helping hand. If thee are like me, our time dost call upon us to awaken to the words of that great contemporary philosopher John Toland, when he describes the deep and irrational prejudices that hath driven how we has treated the Jews here and in every country of Europe. I quote, "The Jews are far from being an excrescence or sponge and useless members in the Commonwealth. Rather, they are as obedient, peaceable, useful, and advantageous as any. Shouldst we compose the like mistake with the poor and dispossessed, when they also could contribute to the well-being of our communities as the Jews doth when granted a chance? We must reject false interpretations of Scripture to justify such a harsh penal system. Wouldst Jesus condone these barbaric acts? Of course not. Hence why doth we? Therefore, I propose that we release all debtors from prison and do our best to aid in their employment. Together, we can forge a new direction for our country's penal system. Mr. Speaker, I yield the floor.
While Oglethorpe's fellow Tories were celebrating his speech's success, the Whigs sat motionless and watched with disdain. A few minutes later, as Oglethorpe was exiting the chambers and being congratulated by many of its members, John Perceval, also known as Lord Egmont, approached him. Perceval was in his early 50s then and a man of commanding presence. Politically, he was quite connected and respected and served on the committee chaired by Oglethorpe that investigated the prison system.
James, well spoken.
I appreciate your kind words, John. It did hit the mark, did it not?
Indeed. It is time to act. Let us request the king approve a measure to create a new colony in the territory south of Carolina and north of Florida that grants advantage to the poor, allotting them land where they can thrive and prosper without the encumbrances of London society.
That is a sterling idea. Do you believe we could persuade him to approve such a bold action?
How can he deny such a project if we name it after him? That's not to say there shall be political challenges, yet that doesn't worry me. Join me at my club for lunch to dwell on this further.
And so, Perceval and Oglethorpe put into motion the plans to create the great colony of Georgia. By 1731, they were ready to gather men interested in becoming trustees of the colony. It was a motley assembly of political and religious leaders.
Gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to consider this historic endeavor to create the new colony of Georgia. James, please outline what we have in mind.
Thank you, John. We're all here because we wish to help poor and distressed families. By settling these people in a new colony, we can erase the stigma of poverty for those willing to work hard to lift themselves from the stranglehold that suppresses their human dignity. Yes, Mr. Heathcote.
Sir, can you reassure us we will not replicate the despicable practices of slavery prevalent just north of the proposed settlement? If the poor can use slaves to do the work, what motivation will they have to better themselves?
I agree with that sentiment. As a director of the Royal African Company, you are all aware of my efforts to end this hideous practice. If all assembled here become trustees, Lord Egmont and I insist you concur with Mr. Heathcote's assessment. There will be no slaves in Georgia.
Sir, may I speak frankly?
Yes, Reverend Bedford.
That is all very well, but what of the matter of spirits, rum in particular? We cannot have the poor lose all initiative because they are inebriated day and night. I propose we forbid the presence of rum and all distilled spirits in the colony.
I agree, Reverend Bedford, and can support such a position. In addition to forbidding rum, gentlemen, as members of the Church of England, we must guard against the invidious control that papists would exert if allowed into the colony. With the Spanish less than 200 miles to the south, we cannot have Catholic sympathizers among us. Agreed? Yes, Reverend Smith.
Mr. Oglethorpe, you must be aware of the ongoing persecution of Protestants by papists. What place will there be in this new colony for those escaping religious persecution by the Pope and his European allies?
Reverend, I have complete sympathy for those being singled out, dispossessed of their homes and murdered because of their faith. We will always welcome any Protestants seeking refuge as long as they are committed to helping us build a prosperous new colony. Yes, Lord Carpenter.
Sir, though I approve, there is the matter of finance. How will this effort be funded? It is unreasonable to expect Parliament to underwrite the entirety of the colony. Perhaps we can solicit private money.
Well said, sir. I am responsible for dispersing Joseph King's charity fund of £15,000, 5,000 of which is designated for establishing a colony in America, and another 5,000 for Christianizing Negroes and the Indian populations there. While this is a good beginning, we must deputize commissioners to help us raise additional monies. Mr. Vernon has agreed to assist in this matter and has identified several wealthy gentlemen who sympathize with our cause and will raise and contribute funds. Thank you for your efforts, Mr. Vernon. I recognize Mr. Isles.
Sir, I applaud your work, but how do you propose the colony not just survive on our largesse, but thrive and contribute to the Crown's wealth?
Excellent question. Lord Egmont and I have conferred with agriculturists, and we see enormous opportunities in Georgia. Silk production there could employ upwards of 20,000 people. We also expect flax and hemp to be major crops, not to speak of the fine wines we hope to produce in coastal regions of Georgia to rival those of France and Spain. Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Towers.
When can we expect approval from the Prime Minister and the King?
James, allow me to speak to that. I am, how can I put it delicately, working behind the scenes. I suspect no later than 1733 we will be ready to send the first settlers, assuming James can convince 100 or more hearty souls to make the journey.
And who will lead the colony?
Sir, I have decided to take the charge.
A brave choice, sir, to give up everything you have here.
I am young, Mr. Thomas, and have yet to find a suitable bride. What better time in one's life for an adventure? And, might I remind you, Georgia is contested land. We'll have to deal with the Spanish. My military training will, hopefully, be invaluable. Now, if there are no further questions, I would like to see a show of support for all who wish to become founding trustees of our new colony of Georgia. Hear, hear, hear! Hear, hear! Hear, hear!
But how did all of that affect us?
That's where the story becomes interesting. Remember Anthony da Costa?
The man who helped your father bail Moses out of jail?
Yes, he wasn't just wealthy, he was one of the richest men in all of England. It was only natural that Mr. Vernon, Oglethorpe's colleague, would seek his assistance. But little did Vernon know that da Costa and his associates had their own agenda. Álvarez López Suazo was one of the wealthiest men in London and could trace his lineage back to Spain, where his family had been wealthy bankers before 1492. Francis Salvador was also one of London's wealthiest Jews and one of the largest shareholders of the Dutch East India Company.
I had the good fortune this past Thursday to run into Lord Egmont. He tells me that he and James Oglethorpe are appealing to the king to start a new colony in America. They're calling it Georgia.
Wise decision, appealing to the king's vanity.
Indeed. As you might expect, there are some headwinds from the Prime Minister, but I suspect that they will succeed. They're looking for commissioners to help them raise money to support the colony. He inquired if we might have some interest in the matter.
Maybe what we have here is a solution to our dilemma. Just yesterday, Rabbi Nieto informed me that 12 more penniless immigrants from Eastern Europe showed up at the synagogue's doorstep, expecting help. Oh, we all appreciate the importance of charity. There are limits.
What do you suggest?
Let us volunteer our services to assist Lord Egmont, and then insist they relocate these Jewish peasants to the new land where they will be Lord Egmont's and the king's responsibility for support, not ours.
And what makes you think they'll take so many Jews? The ancestors of these trustees are the same ones who kicked us out of England in 1290. Do you really think that they have had a major change of heart?
Times have changed, Anthony. Look at us. 3 Jews, well positioned in English society.
True, but let's proceed with caution. If we play our hand right, in the end, they will need us and our money more than their prejudices.
Please inform Lord Egmont that we will be happy to assist.
Yes, I'll see him at the club tomorrow.
Was our family the Jewish peasants he wanted to ship to America?
No, by no means. We weren't peasants. But there were many people being persecuted coming to England, not just from Portugal, but also from Prussia, where state and church-sponsored violence aimed at Jews was a daily occurrence. And they, like us, came to England with nothing but the shirts on their backs. That's how my father met the Sheftall family one day while studying Talmud with the rabbi. Benjamin and Perla Sheftall fled from Prussia due to restrictive edicts from the king and the escalating violence against Jews. They were still young then, but the stress of their escape showed visibly in Perla's face.
It's been told that 2 famous rabbis, Hillel and Shammai, were each approached by a non-Jew who wished to convert. Hillel was gentle, lenient, and compassionate. On the other hand, Shammai was very strict in his interpretations of the Torah. The Gentile said he would accept Judaism if a rabbi taught him everything he needed to know about Torah, while the rabbi stood on 1 foot. First he went to Shammai, who had no patience for such a fool, and sent him away. But when he went to Hillel, he accepted the challenge, stood on 1 foot and said, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor." That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary.
Really?
Yes, come in.
Rabbi, sorry to interrupt. 2 people just arrived from Prussia, and we're directed here rather than the Ashkenazi synagogue.
And why haven't you already invited them in?
Of course. Give me just a minute to bring them in. Rabbi, let me introduce you to Benjamin and Perla Sheftall.
Welcome to London and Bevis Marks Synagogue. I am Rabbi Isaac Nieto. This is my good friend Samuel Nunez from Lisbon, an immigrant like you.
Thank you. I am Benjamin Sheftall, and this is my wife, Perla.
Please sit. You both must be exhausted.
Thank you.
David, please bring tea for everyone and some of those nice little scones.
Certainly.
Where are you from?
Frankfurt an der Oder. It is a small town on the Oder River, near Poland.
I am told there have been edicts against the Jews by the Prussian king.
Yes. I thought we could go on with our lives like always, but this last edict was not like the others. It gave us no choice but to flee.
Others have told me that there has been increasing violence against us Jews.
Regrettably true. These edicts seem to have unleashed something horrible, seething under the surface. One morning, the town mayor posted an edict from the king. When I heard Gentile merchants shouting for our death, it made our decision to leave easier. What does it say?
The bastard king decrees we have to go.
What?
Start packing and get out now while you can.
Filthy vermin! We're sick of your stench!
Christ killers! Christos murder!
Take your dirty money and get off our land!
That's when things really got ugly. One of the merchants shoved an older man I knew to the ground, and others gathered around and started kicking him.
Judith Saul, Schwein!
I turned and ran as fast as I could to get home. I found Perla in the kitchen, cooking, and took her by the shoulders. We are leaving, now!
Leaving? For where?
Anywhere but here. The king has just decreed we are no longer welcome, and there's a murderous gang of thugs rioting and killing Jews in the marketplace. Gather your clothes, anything you can carry by yourself in a satchel.
I have to say goodbye to my parents.
No time.
My sister!
Perla, if we want to be alive by the time the sun sets, we must leave Frankfurt now.
This is the conclusion of Episode 8 of Flames of Freedom. Written by Richard Stone. Produced and directed by Mark Simon at Q-Tone Productions. Audio engineering, original music, and sound design by David Wilson. Executive producer Lance Toland. Special thanks to our ensemble cast. Zipporah, played by Angelina Santana. Benjamin, played by Jamie Tresalian. Samuel Nunez, played by Juan Pablo Gamboa. Rebecca Nunez, played by Gabriela Lopetegui. James Oglethorpe, played by Ian Russell. Additional roles played by Brad Davidorf, Francois Clemenceau, Roxanne Rittman, and Barry Stoltz. Thanks to Rabbi Saul Rubin, whose assistance throughout the development of the series was invaluable, and for their guidance and support of this project from its early inception. Special thanks to Rabbi Robert Haas of Congregation Mikveh Israel in Savannah, Georgia. Rabbi Rachel Bregman of Temple Beth Tefillah in Brunswick, Georgia. Rabbi Shalom Morris of Bevis Marks Synagogue in London, England, and Lord Peter Levine of London City, England, and the Jewish Heritage Alliance for their support. This has been a production of Lance Toland Entertainment, copyright 2024, all rights reserved. Flames of Freedom is a docudrama based on actual historical events. To learn more about this story, the actors, and the backstory of its production, join in on the conversation on Facebook at Flames of Freedom or at flamesoffreedom.net.